exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Boy, it's awful dark out here. Who in their right mind goes fishing so late at night?
Shh, keep your voice down. You'll scare the fish away. This is the best time, you know. The fish are really jumping tonight.
Well, I'm getting pretty jumpy myself for sure. See that light off in the distance? It seems to be coming closer and closer. You think it's an airplane?
Nope. Looks like a spaceship to me. Huh. I hope they aren't in the mood to fish for humans.
Well, we'll have to be careful about... there we go. Hey. All right. Tim, how are you out there in Jasper, Indiana? We got a historic program tonight.
Yes, I'm looking forward to talking with Calvin tonight. You know, I remember when very clearly in 1973 when the media just jumped all over their encounter. You know, 1973 was a pretty interesting year when it came to UFO sightings, and so I mean, and their incident really stands out in my memory.
Well, I think even Rolling Stone magazine, who very seldom ever, if ever, does a article or a news piece on UFOs, did a piece on this particular case. But why don't you come a little closer to the mic there, Tim, and introduce our award-winning guest for the evening?
Oh, it would be my pleasure. Well, tonight we have with us Calvin Parker. Now, Calvin was born in 1954 in Seminole, Texas. And by the age of 3, his parents moved to the Laurel, Mississippi region, which is about 110 miles northwest of Pascagoula. Now, Calvin's father, I didn't know if you knew this, Tim, worked for the Atomic Energy Commission. And his work was to drill test holes to detonate nuclear weapons deep underground, some of which I guess they detonated there in Mississippi. So by the age of 18, Calvin dropped out of high school in Laurel and took a job building trip boats in Pascagoula at the F.B. Walker & Sons shipyard. In 1973, Parker had rented a room from one of his shipyard colleagues, Charles Hickson. So now on October 11th, 1973, Calvin and Charles set off to do some fishing at an abandoned shipyard called Shaw Peters, which was on the west bank of the Pascagoula River. As the two men fished, a football-shaped UFO with blinding light swooped down out of the night sky and landed nearby. What happened next turned the two men into media sensations, and their case went on to become one of the most high-profile UFO stories in American history. Parker says that he is still grappling with an encounter that turned his life upside down. And we're going to be talking to Calvin tonight because he has just recently released a new book called Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter. Now, also with us tonight is Jerome Clark. Now, Jerome's been interested in UFOs and anomalies since his adolescence. Clark is the author of more than 20 books on these subjects, including the prize-winning multi-volume UFO Encyclopedia. Now, he's the former editor of Fate, as well as of International UFO Reporter, the magazine of the Center for UFO Studies, on whose board he served for years working with J. Allen Hynek. His feature articles and reviews are regularly published in the world's premier anomaly magazine, 40 Times. A keen student of folk and roots music, he has written songs recorded by, among others, Emmylou Harris, Mary Chapin Carpenter, and his reviews of current CDs in these genres are posted weekly at rambles.net. So, Calvin, Jerome, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Oh, you mighty welcome. It's good to be here because any day you wake up's a good day.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I've known Jerry. We were both adolescents. In fact, I call, instead of calling him Jerome, I call him Jerry because we known each other since we were both in teen. We were teen ufologists, and of course, we've grown up and we're in middle ufology now. I believe, Jerry. Wouldn't you say that middle ufology? And
Tim, it seems to me that we got started in this. What was it? 3-4 years ago?
at least that's why we know. That's why we know more about the subject than than most people. And by the way, your UFO encyclopedia, it's a brand new edition, isn't that correct?
Yeah, it'll be the third edition, which is 2 volumes, 1,500 pages, will be released a week from today.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And Calvin has got a great book out. I know I've been going through it for the last several days. And I want to start out, instead of my telling the story. Now, I don't think that there's anybody in the United States who hasn't heard of this particular abduction experience. But let's hear it from Calvin firsthand. Calvin, set the stage. You knew Charlie Hickson. You had lived with him for a while. He was a friend of the family.
I'd been knowing Charlie most all my childhood life. You know, I went to church with his children, went to school with some of them, and they lived close by. They was neighbors. So Charlie took a job on the coast, and I was working in the oil field. Now, actually, Charlie and my father was really good friends. He was a good deal older than what I was, but when I ended up coming to the coast to work for him, he had stable jobs down here, and that's what I was hunting. I was in an oil field working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and fixing to get married. So I didn't want to hang around in Sandersville, Mississippi, or Laurel, Mississippi, and work that many hours and be fixing to be married. So I called Charlie up, and he told me, well, come on down. I have an opening in the shipyard. So I came down, rented a room from Charlie. And matter of fact, the first day I was down, I stayed one night over at his house. Then the next day was October 11th of 73. We got up, went to work. So when we went to work, we got our paperwork filled out and got brassed in and got straightened out and did work till about 5 o'clock that day. And we got off. Charlie said, you know, instead of going home and eating and cleaning up and being bored all this time, let's go do a little fishing. We hadn't done that in a while. So we decided to go fishing. We went to his house. Of course, I didn't have my fishing equipment, and I borrowed normally people from the South don't use each other's fishing equipment. That's just unheard of and don't happen. But in this case, I went ahead, being I knew him, and agreed to borrow his stuff. And we went to a place called the Shaw Peters Shipyard, which used to be an old grain elevator there, where they unloaded the ships and the grain would fall off the ships. And the fish would come up and eat the grain. You could usually catch a lot of fish. Now, this is my first time going, but I'd heard Charlie talk about it a good deal, and I was kind of excited about getting there. So when we pulled up and I looked at the location, I thought back in my mind, what in the world, why would somebody want to walk through this mess? Because it was trash everywhere, no refrigerators, and a lot of old debris thrown out in there in this marsh grass. And I said, well, this just comes with the territory. So we got out of the car, got our equipment, and we walked down to the edge of the river. It was about a length of a football field, about 300 yards, where we had to fish from the car, and there wasn't no way to drive down there because of all that. So it took a little while to walk down because of the debris. We got to the river, and we baited up and cast it out, pulled up an old log on a steel pier, and I was looking across the river, and I was looking at a Coast Guard cutter, and I was thinking to myself, how in the world does something made out of steel float? And that's what I was thinking when the blue lights come across from behind me, across the top of my head, and reflected out across the water. I thought, Lord, the law was here to make us move because we got to be trespassing on this property. But they're going to have to get down here, so that's a big act. But I was sitting there watching them blue lights reflecting from behind us across that water. So we both stood up about the same time because that's how bright the lights were, and looked around. And then when we did that, the lights got so bright it was blinding. And I knew right then it couldn't be the law because back in the 70s there wasn't any lights that bright that I knew of. So, but what had happened, or what I figure had happened, the door must have opened up on this craft, and we still didn't know what it was because it was blinding. It was just like throwing lights in your eyes in that dark, and just kind of blocks your vision there for a minute. So, in just a few seconds, and it didn't take long, we noticed three figures approaching us. We still couldn't make out what it was until they got a little closer. But in my mind, I was sitting here thinking, now how did they get on us that quick? You know, it took us a long time to walk through all this mess. But what they were doing, they was floating about 2 foot off the ground across the top of that marsh grass and the debris. Well, they floated right up, and we see there was a mistake right then. We should have run or tried to run, but it was nowhere to run. There was water on the left, water in the right, and water dead in front of us, and it had all trash and debris in the water, old steel pilings and stuff. So 2 of them got a hold of Charlie, and 1 of them got a hold of myself. Well, this is the last time I seen Charlie until we got back out. Immediately when they got a hold of me, it felt like a little puncture in my arm, and that's when they must have ejected something, or it felt like it might have injected something, because I got real relaxed. Now the fear just kind of left right then, because up until that minute I was kind of afraid. But when I felt that puncture, then it just automatically lifted us up. And I was thinking to myself, now I could think plain and I could see, but I couldn't turn my head no way, or I couldn't move anything on my body. So this thing, we automatically came up a couple of foot off the ground, was gliding to the craft. And I was thinking to myself, how come this didn't break my arm if he picked me up? But it didn't take but a second for us to get to the craft. And when we went in, he took a left turn with me. Now, keep in mind, I still couldn't turn my head to look because I wanted to see if Charlie was around, see what was going on with him. And then he took another little right and put me in a room in here on a table. So now I say he put me on a table. I've never seen the table, but I could tell. Well, actually, I couldn't feel the table. I was levitating there, and I figured I was on a table, about a 45-degree angle. And then there's something looked like a deck of cards, about the size of a deck of cards, came out of the wall, out of the ceiling, and it went down and it stopped right between my eyes, about a foot between my eyes, and it rotated around my head. It went around one full turn, but it clicked on each side of my head and in front and the back about 4 times, and then it went right back up in the ceiling. And that's when I noticed there was a different being other than what I call the big ugly creature. It was a different one came out, and I don't know if it was male or female. It was more of it wasn't as frightening as what had come in. And I would call it a female because it was feminine looking, but came out and took her hands, or its hands, and pulled on my cheeks, looked down my throat, and run her finger down in the back of my throat and took it out. And I didn't feel no feelings on the fingers. I don't know if they was warm or cold, but I couldn't feel nothing. And then the fear started coming back to me. And I was laying there, I was starting to come out of what little bit of trance I was in. And I distinctly remember it was just like she had talked or said something, "Don't be afraid." And but her lips never moved. And it kind of calmed me down for a minute. We're not going to hurt you. Don't be afraid. And then she turned around and went back up to the another room or somewhere because I didn't see her no more. And the old big ugly would come back in there, carried us back out to the river, or carried me back out, set me down in front of the river. My arms were stretched out facing the river. And that's when I heard Charlie again. Charlie said, Calvin, you okay, son? You okay? And that kind of brought me out, and I turned around and watched, and I heard the craft just kind of pick up and leave. Then it made a zipping noise. And when it come up off the ground, it was gone. I mean, you couldn't see it no more. Just disappeared.
Well, now, Calvin, when they picked you up, bodily, what did their flesh feel like? Could you tell? I mean, get any feeling as to what they were composition might have been? I
couldn't feel nothing. As far as feeling their flesh, either one of them, the big one that come out and got me, I think it was more robotic than anything because it just moved like mechanical wise. Now the other one, is this the one that I referred to as the mummy? Yeah,
kind of looks like a mummy, right?
It did. It had skin.
In fact, I had a painting. I might still have it in the closet here somewhere. And if I ever find it, I'll send it to its rightful owner, which is probably you. That was done while you were under hypnosis by Curtis Watkins.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
sure.
To me, it always looked like. I always said the Mummy's Revenge or something like that. Could you tell how? Did it have substance though? I mean, did it feel? You say it felt more like it was robotic than it was flesh and blood.
Yeah, the movement was. Now I could see it, but I couldn't feel nothing. You'd figure you'd feel maybe the heat off their body or their skin when it raked on you. I was thinking it probably felt like a pair of gloves, but I don't know. I didn't feel nothing except for that puncture in my arm at the time. And later on, they confirmed that it was probably a shot that they gave me of some kind or an injection. They really didn't say shot, but some kind of injection.
Now, okay. Once the episode was finished and done with, and I know you spent the night in the cell with Charlie, and we'll get to that. But did you feel that this the shot that they gave you, did it have any effect at all on your body that you know?
It calmed me down. It must have been kind of like a tranquilizer or something. And I'm just guessing at this. I don't know for sure. But I was scared. Anybody would be scared right then. But then when he grabbed me and actually I heard something like a shot of air go into my arm. And it was real sore for a day or two after that. But it just kind of really calmed me down. But it was something that didn't last because from the time we went inside the craft, it was starting to wear off when this other creature was examining me.
Now, do you think, okay, how from outside, how large was the craft? Would you say, let's say, compared to an automobile, or was it a 747?
No, it wasn't the size of a 747. It was it's really just hard to tell because the lights were so bright coming off. But it was I don't know, probably I'm gonna say 150 foot long. Mm-hmm. I don't know how wide it was, but it was somewhere in that area. I don't exactly know.
Yeah. Well, now it obviously was made up of various compartments inside. Would you say that the dimensions inside were different than you would imagine it when compared to what you saw from the outside?
Actually, from what I seen inside, they just took me in that hallway, and then they made a little left, and they went into a little smaller room. And I'm going to say the room was probably like a 12 by 12 or a 10 by 12 or something like that. Mm-hmm. But I didn't see any doors or nothing in the room. And I know she come out of something. But then again, I couldn't turn my head and really get a good look. All I know is
Hmm.
I looked for some light fixtures when I went in because the lights were so bright. And I said, well, maybe, I'll see some light fixtures in here and can make something out. But the lights was coming out of the wall like it was in the paint or something, illuminating out of the walls. And
Hmm.
I never
And,
did figure that out.
well, where do you figure Charlie was? Now, why did they separate the two of you, do you think? And his story is slightly different, obviously, than yours.
I don't know why they might have separated us. And, to be honest with you, Charlie's got a book out, and I never read the book, or I never really
Yeah.
talked to Charlie about what went on. Because once we got
Mhm.
out of this craft and went through what we did for the next 2 or 3 days, we was pretty well separated except for our drive home and all. So we never really talked about this. The only thing we was telling each other, don't tell nobody. I said, Charlie, please don't mention this. I don't want nobody to know I was even involved in none of this. And he kept saying, well, I got to tell somebody. I'm going to call Keesler. And Keesler is a local Air Force base in Biloxi, Mississippi, and that's who he called. And they told him to call the local authorities, which would be the sheriff department. And that's where we messed up, I guess, because they must have told somebody or somebody was listening in on a scanner or something and heard
Mhm.
it. Because back then there
You,
wasn't no cell phones or anything to
oh, I know.
call.
Did you drive over to the police station?
I did. Well, what actually happened when we left the scene? Now, when I got back to the car, that was a brand new little '73 Rambler Hornet. I had just got that little car, and it was new, and the windows were shattered on the passenger side of the car because that was the side facing the craft. And we got in the car and tried to crank it, and it wouldn't crank for probably 15 minutes. And I can remember being amazed that the battery would stand up that long, trying to crank it. But it eventually got busted off and it didn't run real good for a little while, but it leveled out and we made it to a store. And that's where Charlie made the phone call to Keesler and they
Hmm.
told him to call the local authorities. And he called the sheriff department and they said, y'all don't go nowhere. Just sit right there where you are. I guess they thought we was drinking or just
Yeah, yeah.
having
But leave your
fun or something.
leave your beer on the shelf, right? And
Yeah, like we didn't have
well,
plenty of time to hide one if we had one.
all right. Well, that's an incredible story, and it certainly made quite a bit of attention. How long before the actual incident made it into the newspapers? Would it have been 2 days later?
No, the next morning, and it
Next
probably
morning.
made it. It probably made it into it that night if I had been around the newspaper or something. But
All right.
All right,
First,
gentlemen.
first.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Go ahead. It's our first break of the evening. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Calvin and Jerome.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. So, Tim, let's bring Jerome Clark into the conversation. And Jerome, as
Call
Tim
me
alluded,
Jerry, please.
oh, okay, all right. Well, thank you. And it's great to have you back on the show. By the way, as Tim alluded to earlier in the program, you two knew each other when you were teenagers. So, I mean, what got you interested in the whole UFO subject to begin with?
Oh, I read a book. Yeah, that's probably where those of us who got seriously active in, organized ufology, most of us got started. Most of us of our generation got started reading the book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Edward Ruppelt, who was the chief of Project Blue Book in the early 1950s. And he wrote this book, which was published in 1956. It was really rare among the books published at the period of, first of all, just telling a lot of stuff that the Air Force had done while it was investigating UFOs in the late 40s and early 50s, stuff that wasn't generally known. And Ruppelt wrote this book in the tone of a completely rational, open-minded guy. And so you read the book, and it, unlike a lot of the UFO literature then and now, it was, it didn't insult your intelligence. It just got down to really what the questions are, what the evidence is, and excuse me. And he kind of let you make up your own mind. But we know now that Ruppelt was deeply skeptical of UFOs, but apparently he figured that if he wrote a book like that, it wouldn't sell.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, it's still a pretty good book, and it got a lot of us hooked.
And Tim, I don't know if you're back on, Mike. I mean, did you think, and Jerry can comment on this too when he comes back, that when you started all of this, that here it is, how many years later, that you would still be involved in UFOs? This, considering all of the things that has happened, in between when you started and now. And it seems to me that a lot of the stuff is still the same. It hasn't changed a lot. As Jerry pointed out, a lot of the books that were being written at the time were pretty sensational, and I think that the same can be said today. So I mean,
not for our title, certainly.
no. But I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I mean, did you think? Do either of you? I mean, do you think that that looking back, that when you were teenagers, that you would still be at this? How many years later? 5 or 6 years since you started?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
It was all new then, and I don't think that we were thinking long term.
Right.
We just stumbled into this, and it was fascinating, and it was fun, and you started meeting other people, like other young people in those days, who were interested, and you were glad to get to know people from other parts of the country, and Tim was publishing even then. And I was the associate editor of one of his newsletters.
You corrected my spelling, which was always terrible.
Yeah, we had a good time, but I don't think we were thinking long term. We were just living day to day, and I think, I can't speak for Tim, but I don't think he would object when I say that. I think both of us are kind of shocked that all these years later, here we are still talking about this, thinking about it, trying to make sense of it, and writing about it.
Well, okay. Do you think that much has changed, in the whole field from then to now?
Well, yes and no. One thing remains constant. The phenomenon remains beyond current human knowledge. We just don't know. When we started out, I think we all thought that it was going to be solved in a few years. And then the longer we were with it, the longer we looked at, the more complicated it got and the stranger it got. And new elements were continually being added. We started with this just core of what we now call daylight discs, sometimes tracked on radar, seen by reliable people. So it seemed as if there was really a core of mystery there. But over time, it just got stranger and stranger. And yes, it did change. It got more impenetrable. It got harder and harder to understand, to get a grasp on. And we all ran down what turned out to be blind alleys. And if we were paying attention, we had to change our mind as new data, new possibilities, new theories came to light. So, it's been, to me, particularly in my later years, I look back on it, it's just been a great intellectual challenge. It's just, it's just very strange, and it has taught me, if nothing else, that just the kind of hidden dimensions of life and history, and given me kind of a much fuller and richer sense of the possibilities of this world.
So now, looking at Calvin's story, which took place in 1973, that was a very interesting year for UFOs in the United States.
Yeah, particularly that month, October 1973, which was the beginning of perhaps the last great American wave. The phenomenon had been characterized by a series of waves that would come on every 2-3 years. And there'd be all kinds of sightings. And then the wave would recede and sightings would continue. They always continued. But there were periods when they were just at seemingly incredible intensity. And October 1973 was really the last one of them in the United States. And then the phenomenon seems to have become more diffuse. And it continued, and people had experiences and sightings, and radar continued tracking strange objects. And people saw sometimes entities associated with these phenomena. And that went on, but not in specifically wave form. And that's one of the changes that have happened over the course of the phenomenon, where, we all know that public awareness of the UFO phenomenon began in June 1947. So although it certainly was around before then, the only people who seemed to know about it were the people who had the experiences, which were sometimes recorded in newspapers or journals or scientific publications. But it wasn't until 1947. So when we talk about the UFO phenomenon, we usually, just for purposes of convenience, begin counting in late June 1947. So since 1947, no, it hasn't all been the same. It's been a steady addition of odder and weirder elements. And what started out as a seemingly solvable problem within current knowledge, or just something of a slight extension of current knowledge, would be understandable and explainable. When it started out, people were not thinking of UFOs from outer space. That was an idea that really didn't take hold in the popular mind until the early 1950s. And in the early polling on the subject in the late summer of 1947, people who thought these could be interplanetary flying objects, that view was so rare it didn't even register in the polls. And so there was this, over time, over the next few years, there was this sort of process of elimination of the alternative theories, because the first theory, of course, is always, it's all nonsense. People are imagining this, or they're seeing familiar things and misunderstanding them. But when the phenomenon continued, some of these sightings, particularly, sightings by Air Force pilots and airline pilots and, some pretty reliable people, it became clear that to those who were open-minded about it, that this was a phenomenon that appeared to be technological. And then it was clear that it wasn't an American technology, it wasn't a Soviet technology, it didn't seem to be anybody's technology. And so finally, by the process of elimination by the early 1950s, people were starting to think about visitors from other planets. And in those days, it was Mars was the suspected planet, because even astronomers thought in those days that Mars could harbor intelligent life. And we know, of course, that Mars does not and could not harbor intelligent life. But in those days, it seemed a reasonable theory. And that's kind of where we start with the awareness that UFOs are not ours. They're not conventional. They're not explainable. And we've come a long way since we thought about flying saucers from Mars. And now we have really, my sense is in my late years looking back at this, is that we're dealing with something that we have a hard time even conceptualizing.
Yeah, it always, to me, the early days of the modern UFO era, as I like to call it, from 1947 onward, you had these people who claimed to have had encounters with the occupants of these crafts, and the occupants would tell them, "Oh yeah, we're from Mars or Venus, or even Jupiter," something like that. But then as time went on, and we had our own probes to these planets, and found that was pretty much impossible. Then the story started to change from these occupants. They got further and further out. Oh yeah, we're from Zeta Reticuli. Yeah, that's it, Zeta Reticuli. It's a little more difficult right now to check up on.
Well, Jerry, would you say that the subject has made it more difficult for us to contemplate? I mean, is there somebody behind the, I would say, controls of the ship, but I mean it in a not in quite a literal sense, trying to keep us maybe even interested, or making us? I've always thought that UFOs, in a sense, are very symbolic to the fact that it is a thinking process. I mean, it's made certainly a lot of us in the field think about things that we would never have possibly contemplated before. Is it pushing science ahead or keeping it back?
I have no idea what is on the other side of this, and what the other side is thinking. If thinking is even the relevant word here. I don't know. I mean, I think that I believe that it's possible we're dealing with two different things, and we're confusing two categories. And part of the confusion is, well, it's inevitable because, as I say, I think this is just beyond anything we know now or may know for a long time. But I think that when we started out and there were these sightings, the radar sightings and the sightings of, daylight discs and metallic-looking objects and so on, that may have been a different phenomenon from the one that evolved over time. The one thing that I keep going back to is the realization that human beings have been having extraordinary experiences for as long as there have been human beings. And they were explained different ways, at different kinds of categories. But these experiences were not just imaginary or hallucinatory. I mean, they were very strange and dramatic. They were vivid experiences that people were unlikely to be fooled about. And I think that UFOs are connected with kind of worldwide traditions of supernatural entities of all kinds. Now, there may be a core UFO phenomenon, which for all I know is genuinely extraterrestrial, and this is the phenomenon of what I call the event phenomenon, and this is where these UFO events happen, that there really is independent, instrumented evidence that something was there, and that something had some kind of fantastic, unearthly technology driving it. And of course, that was the phenomenon that we grew up with in the early years. And then
now,
the phenomenon.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go on.
Then all these other things, we really begin to notice this in the later '60s. All these other strange things seem to get attached to this core of arguably extraterrestrial phenomena. Now, I'm not saying that they were extraterrestrial, but I think that it is not unreasonable to speculate like that when you're dealing with hardcore evidence of somebody else's technology. But then you begin. Now,
when did you start working for the Center for UFO Studies?
Mid-1980s. Alan Hynek asked me to edit the International UFO Reporter, which was CUFO's magazine.
And had he mentioned the Pascagoula incident?
We talked about so many things over the 10 years that I was around him. He died in 1986, and so I started being around him a lot 10, 12 years before that. I don't specifically remember his talking about Pascagoula, but he may have. As I say, we talked about so many different things, and my memory isn't what it used to be. So I just can't tell you. But he was certainly interested in cases like Pascagoula, and abduction stories and high strangeness UFO cases. And we would talk about that, and we'd sometimes argue about how to interpret these things.
Now he started getting towards the end of his career a little bit more liberal-minded. I mean, we think of him as the mighty astronomer and the pipe-smoking scientist who, of course, was in Close Encounters. But I I met him several times. I can't say that we were close associates or anything, but I did spent the whole afternoon with him one time doing an interview for UFO Report magazine, and he talked about some fairly incredible things there, including visitations by men in black and UFO witnesses being threatened and so forth.
Well, Alan, first of all, Alan, for much of his life, had a mystical side. I mean, that was
That's
no
true.
To people that knew him.
Yeah.
And so
yes.
eventually, through the encouragement of Jacques Vallée, he began to incorporating the kind of mystical, occult side of his personality, which ordinarily he kept out of public view for obvious reasons. But he began incorporating those ideas and talking somewhat incautiously in public about how these things might apply to UFOs. And of course, the debunkers were thrilled to hear this because they could use that to beat him up with, which they did. But Alan was involved in things that have never been particularly of any interest to me, namely, like Rudolf Steiner and Rosicrucianism. And I was just not interested in those things. And when he would talk about them, my eyes would kind of glaze over. So I just wish that he wouldn't talk about them publicly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was also a very serious scientist. I don't want to decry that. He loved science, and he was a serious scientist. So he did also have a keen analytical side to his intelligence.
Well, that's if you ask me, that would be a fairly well balanced individual. You don't find many people in the scientific community who have a very open mind towards now most of this. Now, it could be changing. I don't know, because I never claimed to be a scientist, nor have I ever hung out really with academics. But I mean, you could seem to feel that there are some involvement. Well, now the Center for UFO Studies. What was its main body of members?
Well, it was, of course, it was started by Alan and Sherman Larson, who had a small local Chicago UFO group.
And Sherman Larson, yeah.
Alan and Sherm worked together. Sherm was an insurance salesman. They were very different in their personalities and their education, the way they thought. But I think they were probably a good pair because Sherm had good organizational skills. He knew how to put together a group, how to operate a business, and all those things that Alan had no clue about, nor do I. But so he and Sherm worked together productively. And so Alan took his idea for a group called the Center for UFO Studies and combined it with Sherm's little local UFO group, and that was the core of the Center for UFO Studies, and I think that was in late 1973, in the wake of the big wave that Calvin's experience was part of.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you remember any specific incidents from that period outside of Pascagoula?
Well, of course, the most famous case, there are two classic cases. The other one was the Coin helicopter incident in Mansfield, Ohio, that occurred exactly 1 week after Calvin and Charlie Hickson's experience. And that was an encounter with a helicopter that was apparently levitated in an aerial encounter with the UFO, which shot a green beam at it. And the plane, there was 1,800 feet, I believe it was a descent, that really could not be accounted for. And the incident was witnessed by various people on the ground. Was investigated meticulously by Jenny Zeidman, who was associated with the Center for UFO Studies, and it's very case.
I actually met him. He appeared at the UN UFO conference. He was one of the
Lawrence Coyne, chief witness.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were actually. I think there were 4 guys in the helicopter, and he was the guy in charge. Yeah.
And you said there was one other case that you remember?
Well, there were 2 cases that really, stand out in memory from that wave.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was, the Pascagoula case, which is remembered because it's so incredibly strange and just, unsettling. One of these incidents where 2 guys are just minding their own business and living their ordinary lives, and suddenly disrupted by something that they could never have imagined was even possible, much less that it could happen to them. And but of course, in the end, the Pascagoula case, although there were people who did see strange objects, one of which may have actually been the UFO that took Calvin and Charlie, but these were the two guys who had the full experience. With the coin case, there were the four guys in the helicopter, and there were people on the ground, separate groups of people who independently witnessed this. So it's an incredibly evidential case, and that has stood up, many attempts to debunk it.
Was it picked up on radar, the UFO?
No.
No. Well, isn't that kind of strange that it wasn't, do you think? Or?
No, because radar doesn't cover 100% of the sky, and this wasn't covered by any place particularly that radar was interested in. It wasn't, just like my memory is hazy, of course, but it was, I believe, just a, routine flight that had no larger significance. No, nobody thought that there should be radar. I don't think even a debunker like Phil Klass raised that objection.
Don't upset my stomach. I just ate. Okay, well now, there were the abduction phenomenon, I guess, was just kind of coming to the forefront. I mean, of course, there was Betty and Barney Hill, but they were increasing in number, and this might have been the incident perhaps that tipped the scale as far as national attention went.
Yeah, well, of course, the Hill case was the one that got all the attention, but yes, I think that in terms of bringing the phenomenon to larger attention, the Pascagoula case certainly has a large role in that.
All right, gentlemen, let me interrupt you here because we have to go to our top of the hour break. So when we come back, we'll bring Calvin back into the conversation with more Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. Tonight, we are talking with Calvin Parker and Jerry Clark, and we're talking about Calvin Parker's 1973 UFO experience encounter at Pascagoula, Mississippi. So, Jerry, you said that you had some questions that you'd like to ask Calvin, so go right ahead.
Yeah, Calvin, this is Jerry Clark, and I just want to say before I say anything else, it's really an honor to talk with you. I've been familiar with you for a long time, and I never thought I would actually be talking with you. So,
well, the honor's really right here with me.
Well, I don't know about that, but I was reading your book this week, and really reading it with interest, and I was particularly interested in the account that I was unaware of. And Bud Hopkins was a very good friend of mine, by the way, but he had never mentioned this to me for some reason. I guess we just had a lot to talk about when we'd get together, and it never came up. But you talk about, this is all new to me, this encounter with this, was it a woman or some kind of female entity?
That's what I'm guessing. It's really hard to say. There was just an entity, but it looked kind of like a female instead of a male. A male usually is bulky and muscled a little bit. She was kind of feminine. Now, I did look to see if I could see breast or anything like that, and I couldn't see nothing like that, on her. Trying to distinguish.
Was this like a kind of female equivalent to this other character you were dealing with who you felt was male? I mean, was it the same
No, this
species or
was.
whatever?
I don't see any relation to, as far as I'm concerned, to the one that the male, the what I call the big ugly one in this one. Uh, like in the animal kingdom, usually the male is the better looking one because they got more feathers and more colors and all like
Right.
that. But in this, you could look and tell that this was pure evil looking, the robotic looking, the creature that I seen. And I think the reason Bud never mentioned it, Bud has always been a man of his word, from what I understood, because I talked to
Yeah.
him several times on the phone after that, and he promised me he would never tell nobody or bring it up in any of his conferences or anything like that. And then, but it's a shame I never did know when he even passed away.
Yeah, well, Bud was a good guy, and he kept his word, and so that's probably why I didn't hear about it. But in your book, you talk about this. Now, this female. I mean, was this like a human being with skin and hair and all that?
I didn't see any hair, and the skin was more like well, it's hard to really describe the skin. It was a grayish looking color, like I had been seeing. And I described it one time kind of like a manatee skin in a way. You look at these manatees that swim around in Florida, that kind of resembles their skin and all, except it wasn't as wrinkled and all as that, but it was about the same colors as the skin there. And all I know is, she was pretty treacherous if it was a she.
Well, now when you came out of in the immediate aftermath of your experience, and you and Charlie are trying to come down, and it's taking you, a while to process all this, and over the days that passed after the experience. Did you remember this clearly, this encounter with this female?
I did, but the thing about this, when we come out, I didn't want to talk about none of this. So Charlie and I sat on the pier out there after this happened to us, and I said, Charlie, I'm not talking about it. I don't want to talk about it. He said, well, I'll think of something. He said, I'll just tell them you passed out or something. I said, I don't care what you tell them. I just don't want to talk about this to nobody. And I said, passing out sounds like a good deal to me. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the story. We stayed with it. And Charlie stayed with that, I guess, to protect my feelings. And because I had known him as a child for years, and I really looked up to Charlie. He was a constable there in Sandersville in law enforcement, and I thought a lot of his children and him and his whole family. I remember on weekends we would all go over and eat at each other's house, and all the kids would play, and he had a little farm out there. We got to enjoy some of the cattle, watching them.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think that put Charlie into protection mode. Even remember one time when we went fishing together on the Pearl River, and I fell off in the water, and Charlie didn't hesitate at all to come off in there and get me. And, I was just a young boy. So to me, he was like a hero.
Yeah, he sounded like a good guy. Now you talk about this in the book. You describe the female entity as really menacing and evil, and you thought she was going to do you harm, and you hated her. Was that what you thought about, like in the aftermath of the experience, or did that come out in 1993 with Hypnosis?
A lot of it came out in Hypnosis, and to be honest with you, I have the original tape, one of the original tapes that Bud had when he hypnotized me, and I've never listened to it all the way through because he put like a post-hypnotic suggestion in my head that as I could handle it, I could remember it. and I didn't want to listen above and get ahead of myself and get any kind of ideals that's not original in my head. Of course, them came out of my head, I guess, but I wasn't just
Well,
real sure after this that he didn't implant them.
I'm sure you're aware of the controversy about hypnosis and, people who are unwilling to accept accounts of abduction experiences that are retrieved through hypnosis say, well, it just made it up, or the hypnotist led you to believe this happened, but it didn't really happen. So that's why I'm asking this question, because I'm just trying to get it clear in my own head. I think that Bud was a very good hypnotist, and he was really sensitive to these questions. In fact, I know he was. But they're always going to be raised, and so that's why I want to know how much of this stuff you remembered consciously before the hypnosis.
I remember a good deal of it, consciously, but I don't remember all the details that was in it. And for example, one thing that I didn't remember, when we originally come off in '73, there was a car out there, and I remember seeing the car clearly. But I didn't want to take time to see if they seen anything or not. But I called the tag number out when Bud had me hypnotized. And here recently, I checked out that tag number. We was able to go back and look it up, and I actually found the people that was involved in that. Now, one of them they got married. They was there parking. One of them passed away. The other one's in a nursing home now with kind of dementia in a way, but she did remember that, but she didn't want her name brought up or anything. So out of respect for her, I didn't tell what nursing home she's in or her name or anything. But that was for me there. When I looked her up, that was strictly for me to confirm this part of the hypnosis session. Because I've seen acts on TV, I don't know if it was acts or not, where somebody was in Las Vegas, to hypnotize the whole audience. And I always thought that was bull. And I just wasn't real sure about it. But on the other hand, when I went in to agree, when I found Bud at this conference, and that friend of mine I was telling you about, or had mentioned, he was a good friend of mine. He was very, very smart. He was in the medical field. He used to invent different things in the for the medical field and all. So he was up, and I trusted him, and he went in with me, and I got him to sit right there, and I said, "Don't let this man put anything phony in my head." And I even told it in front of Bud. We had a long, deep conversation, and him and his wife were in the room with me, and they agreed to keep it quiet and not tell me nothing about it, because that's what Bud wanted, and wanted me to remember it on my own. And I wanted them to watch Bud Hopkins, because I didn't know Bud Hopkins from anybody at this time. So there's a certain amount of distrust.
Well, it sounds like you went into this with some, proper and intelligent caution. And, I know from, you didn't know Bud, and you did the right thing in calling in your qualified friend. I knew Bud for many years, and he was really a conscientious guy. He was really on the side of the witnesses that he dealt with. He really wanted to do right by them, and he felt that they'd been through enough, and he didn't want to add to their burden. So, but I have one more question for you. Now, in the account in the book, which I believe is the hypnosis stuff, you talk about how this female was clawing at your eyes, and you thought that she was going to trying to claw your eyes out. Is that right?
Well, that's what I thought, because originally she went in and she run her fingers down my throat and tried to come up in my nasal cavities from the inside. I guess that's what she was trying. And I was in a lot of pain. And when it was, my adrenaline got stirred up. And, I guess she had a temper also. And I had a temper, because at this time in my life, I was tired of being messed with. All I wanted to do was go fishing, eat my lunch, go back home clean my fish and, be with my family. And then they just pull you out of the clear blue air, and that really upsets you.
Oh yeah.
So,
but when you came out of the experience with the one on the river with Charlie, I mean, were your eyes bleeding or anything? Do you have any memory of that?
no. I remember them being irritated really bad. It was kind of like, but what I chalked that up to, we worked in a shipyard and we was around welding all day long. And if you don't put your helmet on and you watch somebody weld, then your eyes, you get what they call the blue eye. And you have to really treat them. It might be 2 or 3 days before you can see again. And that's what I was kind of chalking all that up to then.
Yeah.
And even that's what they treated me for when I was went to the hospital the next day after and got an examination. Now I would give anything if we could come up with the hospital records for them because of what they said and the blood work and things like that they performed. But Katrina came by, and back then they didn't keep computers, where you could backlog it, put it on disk, and send it somewhere else. Everything was by hand, and that's what a lot of people don't understand. Well, why didn't you call here? You had a phone. Why didn't you take pictures? You didn't have cell phones back then. You didn't have computers. You didn't have the information highway that you have now. I know if I had written a book back then, it wouldn't have got off the newsstand. But nowadays, you got this computer here, and you got thousands of people that are interested and come in and look at it and read it. And it's just amazing the information that you can get your hands on. I didn't even know what a UFO was. I had never looked into that or heard of anything such as a UFO. Now, I did think that I was scared by a ghost a time or two in my life, but that might have been something else. So, I'm not putting it out there right now.
What was that, before or after the UFO abduction?
Oh, this was back when Kennedy was assassinated. And that's the time frame that I'm putting it in, because I remember him being assassinated not too long after that. My brother and I shared a room together because we had a small house, a couple of bedrooms. So they all put the kids in one room, and we shared a room in there together. And even he woke up screaming, said that he seen something messing with my ear and something in there. And I had felt it. I had heard it that night, and it scared me then. And, it did him. And he was afraid to even be in the same room with me. Matter of fact, it scared him so bad he wet all over himself. And he was pretty old.
Well, I'm sure he'd like to hear that today. I'm sure, yes.
Yeah. If he hadn't passed away, I wouldn't have never said that about him. But it's the truth.
Well, I have to ask you, Calvin. You and I met. I don't remember what year it was. Do you think it was about 1990, maybe?
It was probably right in that time right there, because, matter of fact, the only reason I was at that conference, the friend of mine that I was telling you about that was in with went with Bud Hopkins, he loaded me up and took me down there because he was really interested in all this. And I didn't want to talk, but, I figured he was a pretty smart man and they was good friends of mine. And he just wanted to go to one to see what it was about. And that was the only reason I went there.
Well, now, weren't you trying to get involved, or weren't some people trying to get you involved in doing a TV series?
They were. And we actually cut a few tapes. Now, what my involvement was, like I say, this friend of mine, and I'm not calling his name right now because I hadn't heard from him in a long time. But this friend of mine, he had money and he had knowledge, and someone else had hooked him up in Laurel there, that was a newscaster on TV, and he was telling him about. He interviewed me right after this happened, and actually, I don't never remember this guy interviewing me, but he did, and he said, "I tell you what would go over good if we started a thing about UFOs and things like that, and investigated them, and I'll get us on TV, and you pay for it, and we'll let just Calvin do whatever he wants to in it." So they made me executive vice president of UFO investigations, which didn't really mean nothing to me. I mean, I was there, and this guy paid me a little salary for being there because, I wasn't working right at the time. And it lasted. We cut a few tapes, a few talk shows, and invited people on. We even had Charlie on one time.
Yeah,
But
I remember seeing it. Now I don't know how it was broadcast, or maybe it was passed around on videotape or something. But Tim Schwartz and I were talking about that just the other day, about how we remember seeing it. Was it broadcast locally down in Mississippi?
no, it was broadcast out of New Orleans, and it was just before going national. And a matter of fact, the only reason I got involved with that bunch on the deal, they wanted to make a fishing show. And back then, fishing shows was real popular. And
Yeah.
we went out and started that. And then Jim and these guys got involved in these UFOs and all, and psychics. So that's how I ended up getting in all that. But it just lost interest. I lost interest in it, went on to something else, and I think they kept it going for a little while. But we went and made some real good talk shows, and they cut it on 3/4, 1-inch tape, for
Yeah.
regular commercial TVs and all. It went over good. So for a little while, and they had it syndicated. But at that time, I was going to get into that for a little bit, and I just got tired. And the reason why I wanted to hear everybody else's story, I was looking for information then, because I was still having a hard time myself believing what had happened to me. I was trying to throw it off on everything else, and they said, no, this happened. And I really felt like myself, I felt like if it was a UFO or something, it's probably interdimensional. So, but
now, do you remember? I vaguely remember you saying at your during your lecture that this space woman, or this individual, told you that they were responsible for bringing AIDS to Earth.
No, I don't think I ever said that, but I've always said that that was more like demons and kind of afraid, instead of from other planets or something. I always thought they was kind of like a demon, you hear demons being spoke of in the Bible and stuff. And in my mind, I was just trying to place them where they was from and what they was doing here and why they was messing with me.
Well, now, what do you think, though, that now Charlie, when he went public, he seemed to have a more, well, would you call it spiritual approach to the experience? In fact, he kind of insinuated that he was the chosen, that he was responsible. And I don't remember, Tim, do you remember what his message was? I think he had, maybe some prophecies or things that he said were going to transpire.
Oh, I can't remember what the details were on that, Tim. But I remember that aspect. But yes, what the details were, I don't remember.
Yeah.
Well, again, I can only speak, for myself. As far as Charlie, I never really sat down until we had him one time on a show and talked to him. And, even though I was with him, there's things in my mind that I doubted about it too. And that's just me, though. I'm one of these type people that show me and I believe it. Unless you show me, I don't believe nothing you say. And that's just where I was at that point in time in my life. But I know he was abducted because I was there with him, or I didn't see him in his ship, but he was there. We was together.
Now, once you had this experience together, did you fall apart as friends or see less of each other?
We did. I worked one day at that shipyard. The next day we spent at Keesler in the hospital. Then the next day, Dr. Heineck and Harder came down. And then after all that, I left, and I didn't want to see Charlie no more. I could care less. We bumped into each other at places. Sometime he would come home to Sandersville and all, and I'd hear he was there. But as far as talking or communicating with each other, that was pretty much the end of our relationship.
All right, Tim. Well, you need to go to our bottom of the hour break. So when we come back, we'll have more Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. And Tim, here we are at the final segment of the program. Yeah, it's just, it seems like we just get started.
But the only reason that I'm so electrifying because I sit here with one finger in the electric socket. That makes me electrifying. Other than that, these days I'm not quite as electrifying as I used to be. In fact, I feel some days like I've been hit by a bolt of lightning or something.
We're going to start calling you Crankenstein.
Well, that's okay. I don't mind. I've been called a lot of things over the years. But we were just reminiscing during the break, Jerry and I, about how we've known each other since probably about 1964 or 65, I would guess. Right? We all used to read.
I was still in high school, so it would have been probably 64, maybe 63.
Yeah, we used to read. We used to read Ray Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine.
I think that was how we connected.
Yeah, we all did. I think that was the only publication that I can think of. Of course, there are no publications anymore today. The last printed magazine in the English language, and not including 14 Times, because that's not really all UFOs, just folded, and that was the Ufology magazine published out of Australia. That was as far as I know, the last of the print magazines in English.
Wow.
And they kept it going for about 25 years, and they had, it was a pretty good magazine. Of course, it was my articles and Scott Corrales and Tim Schwartz and Bill Chalker got in there once in a while. They had a pretty big international flavor. And then that just all of a sudden, boom, they weren't there anymore. Of course, there are the internet publications, the e-magazines, most of which seem to come out of the UK. You've got Phenomena magazine. You got Underground. I can't remember the name. They're going to kill me. You've got quite a few, that are really spectacular jobs, but they're not in print. If I see an article and I want to read it, I print it out, Jerry. I can't read it on the screen.
Yeah. No, if the article is of any length, it's much easier to read it on a piece of paper.
Yeah, by all means. I don't know. I now my Kindle. I've got a big 10-inch screen Kindle. That's not too bad because you can maneuver the type, up and down. And do you think there are some people out there, Jerry, that have never read an actual book?
Probably. I was on an airplane last year, and I realized, and there were a bunch of people reading on the plane, and I realized that I was the only one who was holding an actual book in his hand.
Well,
that was depressing to me.
Well, I can't quite get into it, but it is what it is, and just think, long after we're gone, let's say another 30 years from now, what the heck will it be then? Because it's going to change. I mean, that's the whole idea of technology, but also too business. Somebody else is going to come along and try to, do the next guy one up, and so they come up with some other. And I guess eventually it'll be, the holograms in your living room. And then
I'm glad that I won't be around to have to deal with that.
So we won't know what's real or not. Well, maybe the aliens have this technology. Maybe this is all. Of course, Richard Shaver said this in the 1940s that it was all holograms and illusions to take our mind away or our thoughts away from what really was happening, which was not necessarily the objects in the sky. It could have been something going on the ground. So I don't know. I mean, Jerry, where would you like to see this go?
What go? Ufology?
Yeah, ufology. Yeah. What direction should we head?
I can tell you that my direction has gone to. I don't even consider myself a ufologist anymore. I think of myself as an anomalist, which is a fancy word for Fortean. I really do
40,
have a Fortean outlook.
Yeah.
That I don't really. The people that I'm most connected with are really kind of see the UFO phenomenon as just part of a much larger tapestry of things that are all related in some way that we just don't understand. But I mean, I have ideas that this isn't the forum to go into them because this is Calvin's show. But that's generally how I have a broad outlook on these things.
Well, okay. We have a few minutes left, and we'll get back to Calvin. But what would you say, Jerry, are your top three cases? I mean, that you believe are evidential that proves that this is all worth investigating.
Well, I think that in terms of the core phenomenon, the phenomenon that we attracted to us when we were young, and the cases that dominated the literature. I mean, it's cases like some of these airline sightings and radar visual cases, and some of the C-2s, the well-investigated ground trace cases are really quite evidential, and they really do speak to some kind of technology. And in fact, in the new edition of the encyclopedia, which comes out next week, Brad Sparks, who is an aerospace engineer in Southern California and is extremely knowledgeable, has been studying the UFO phenomenon all his life. He's a very smart guy, writes about these technical cases. And he argues that they are really strong and they're not debunkable. And one day when science decides that it's not going to ignore this subject and look at it seriously, that's where it will start. And that may be a whole category of its own that has nothing to do with Men in Black and all these other kinds of, weirdness that's gotten associated. That the only similarity between the core phenomenon, the event phenomenon, and the experience phenomenon is that the first is really what it appears to be, somebody's alien technology. And the other, the experience phenomenon, is something that's just taken on this coloration in our time, that in another time it would have taken on another coloration. For example, there's been a long-standing tradition of encounters with, fairy folk.
Oh, yeah.
And you study these encounters, and they don't convince you that there's a fairy realm. But you do become convinced, if you're at all open-minded about that, it is entirely possible to have these experiences, which are, vivid and memorable, and people have encounters with monsters and other kinds of extraordinary creatures. And these experiences probably are not taking place in consensus reality, but they're happening on an experiential level, and they're very real and highly anomalous. And so I think that, arguably abductions too, at least some of them, many of them, most of them, are part of this experience phenomenon that is, just attached to us, attached to the UFO phenomenon of the close encounter of the second kind, the radar visual, just taken on that coloration. but it's not the same thing. It's fundamentally different. It has only a superficial resemblance. This is the conclusion that I have come to and written about in recent years.
Well, that's going to be pretty hard to prove. I mean, like the paranormal aspect of any of this, because it's kind of like
it's by nature not provable.
Provable,
because
yeah.
it happens in experience, but it doesn't happen in the kind of material reality that the core UFO phenomenon seems to be occurring. In other words, in a core event, you can track it on radar. You can study the traces it leaves on the ground and find really very strange content in the soil. But the other kinds of experiences feel just as real, but they're really not happening within the reality that we commonly refer to as, the consensus reality, event level of reality.
Well, I just saw today, I purchased a copy of The Hunt for the Skinwalker, which is a 2-hour and a 15-minute video production with, I believe it's Jerry Corbell and George Knapp. And of course, there you've got the whole litany of UFO and paranormal phenomena, from lights in the sky and crypto creatures and holes being dug, and the sound of machinery coming from underground. Very, very bizarre and very strange. But I have, Jerry, one last question here to throw at you regarding Pascagoula. Philip Mantle, the publisher of Calvin's book, has asked me, I guess, and a lot of other people on Facebook, what happened to Dr. Hynek's files on the subject?
Well, they're still there. The office for the Center for UFO Studies was closed down some years ago, but the material that was in there, which was extremely helpful to me in writing the UFO Encyclopedia series, by the way, is still there. It's in a private residence. A woman who's associated with the center, who lives in a suburb, a north side suburb of Chicago. So all that stuff is there. And
wasn't some of the material though put in storage somewhere in Tucson?
No, I understand the source of the question, but no. The UFO materials are stayed in the Chicago area. It was the APRO files that disappeared in Tucson. Or at least went into private ownership and became inaccessible to research.
Inaccessible, as I understand it.
I'm putting it kindly. So.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, I have had a weird experience with APRO, which I described as synchronicity with the license plate and the whole bit, but I won't go into that tonight. But Calvin, getting back to your experience and your story, if you had to do it all over again, not that you were in control of the situation, would you have rather that the aliens or whoever was piloting the craft had flown over your head and picked up the next guy fishing on the pier, or are you happy? Well, maybe happy isn't the best word, but lucky that you were chosen. I mean, it is an earth-shaking experience, but it's one that few other people have.
I would hate to see anyone have to go through what I've been through with all this. I don't know if chosen would be the right word or not. At times it was torture, and that's my outlook on things. Then times it's been pretty good. Here lately it hadn't been so bad since I've written a book. And the reason I wanted to write this book is everybody has an expiration date on their head, and mine's getting a little closer than most anybody's.
You and me both, man. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you think about it, everybody's kind of dying out, and I wanted to document this, and Philip's the one that taught me into really doing it, putting down your legacy where it won't change, and that's what I wanted to do, because I've never told my story. I've never I tell reporters anything they want to hear. It didn't matter to me because I didn't like reporters. And just here lately, I'm getting where I feel a little better about them because they make a little more sense than what they used to back then. Used to, they thought they like a weatherman. You know, you see a weatherman go out, go set through a hurricane. He's going to find the roughest place he can find with a rain gutter pouring down on his head and get out there and act like he's doing that, you know.
Yes, that's for sure. I've seen that on the TV. They'll find a place that's like a wind tunnel, so it looks like they're being not bowled over by the storm or something. Of course, now with the storm out there today, I don't know as if they're necessarily going to have to do that. Is there anything that you would have changed, or anything that you didn't reveal that you would like to reveal?
Not right now. It's kind of like I say, I got the book. It's out there. Actually, if I had my choice, I never would have wrote the book, you know. But now that I'm into it, it's good speaking about it and being able to talk about it. And I hope to open up more people that's had some kind of experience where it's been a UFO abduction or maybe a paranormal something.
Yeah.
You know, to talk about things and not just keep it under hat like I did. For years, I didn't want nobody to even know I'd seen one. Well, you didn't have a choice as much media's attention. And I really thought the media would calm down over this after 45 years, but they worse now than what they were then, but that's because of the book, I guess. And so...
Has anybody come forward over the years to claim that they were involved in this? I mean, maybe had a sighting the same night, or can validate the same type of experience?
Well, they have. It hadn't been too long ago that I forget their name, come forward, got a hold of Philip, and actually laid some documentation out. And he had to translate it into English because they was from, I forget where they was from. But anyhow, he translated it into English and put it up. And they had actually come down to see Charlie and all. I was gone. They said they seen me, but I wasn't. At that time, I was in Laurel, Mississippi hiding. But they actually had documented this case. And it's been a lot of people come forward, believable people. And then there's been some nuts, too, come forward on it.
I bet you. Tim, you have a couple of questions there you've been...
Well, yeah. One of the things that Calvin, you said earlier, and I found this interesting because, that naturally there's been a lot of people who says, oh, well, these guys just, this made it all up. It was a hoax just to try to make, money. However, you had said that before this incident, you had never even heard of UFOs.
No, sir. I didn't have any clue. I might have suspected ghost or something like that, but no UFOs. I didn't. When they said a UFO abducted somebody, I never heard until after this happened. I never heard of the Barney and Betty Hill case or the Travis Welch. I think Travis was after ours, or going back to Roswell and all. But after that, I've been around it like Jesse Marcel, Colonel Jesse Marcel. On his deathbed, he sent a lady over to get me to come talk to him. And I sat there and talked to the man probably 45 minutes till he gave out. Then I left. But he swears everything was true. And on a man's deathbed, he's not going to lie to you. Like Betty and Barney Hill, the last thing they want to do is draw attention to themselves. A white woman married to a black man in the 60s, that was unheard of. Last thing you wanted was attention.
Oh, yeah. So after this, have you ever had any other experiences or, seen Anything else, in the sky? I would imagine, though, that, considering what's your initial reaction to your experience, that if you did see something in the skies, it's like, I'm just going to go inside now.
Well, I still do a lot of fishing, and I do a lot of fishing at night. And the reason that I fish at night, I like being out there to myself. And you look up in the sky and you see something. It could be a shooting star or something. One morning, my wife and I was fishing, and I was stretched out on the boat taking a nap. We got a pontoon boat, and I was looking up, and there was a big silver thing just come over, but it just so happened to be the Goodyear blimp. So, but that was kind of scary.
I bet. Well, and your wife, I know that you've said that the support of your wife has been really crucial through all this.
Yeah, and her and I never have talked about this up until lately. And the reason we talked about it, she got to want me to do a book to put it all in that, but we had went to a wake that a friend of ours and a neighbor had passed away, and I had signed a register. Now, you'd figure after 40 something years that people wouldn't remember you, but people recognized my name and where we was from down here on the coast, and they come over and started asking me questions about it and all. And I just got up and left the wake because I didn't want to take away from the family, and that wasn't a place for none of this. So on the way home, she said, maybe you ought to write a book. I said, oh, okay. I said, I don't have much education. I don't, English is my worst subject in literature. So, but I got home, and a day or two later, Philip Mandel with a flying disc had called and just wanted to talk to me. And he mentioned, well, Calvin, why don't you do a book? You document it and you write it down like you want it, and people can't change it. It's in there. It's documented. And that made a lot of sense to me. So that's why I decided to do a book. It wasn't for me because I'm retired and got my living made and was fishing 4 or 5 days a week. And I hadn't been fishing since this book's come out. And
well, I've semi-retired myself. I'm 71, but I still publish 3 books a month. And of course, our most recent one that just came out a couple of days ago is called "Screwed by the Aliens." It's about people who claim that they've had actual sexual encounters with ETs. Very strange subject, but fairly well documented. Anyway, we're approaching the midnight hour here on the East Coast, and so one time around the table, Jerry, your book it's available in a week. 1 volume, or is it? How many volumes is it?
It's the 3rd edition of the UFO Encyclopedia. The full title is the UFO Encyclopedia, 3rd edition, The Phenomenon from the Beginning. It's 2 volumes, 1,500 pages total. And it's available from the publisher and from the usual booksellers.
There you go. Well, it's a phenomenal job. Was it updated at all, or is it pretty much?
Oh yeah, no. It was updated. No, it's not just the 3rd printing. It is literally quite different from the 2nd edition. Plenty of new material, updated material.
Well, sneak me a review copy. And Calvin, bless you for being on and for telling your story and us hooking up again after all these years. And the title of your book?
Pascagoula, The Closest Encounter, My Story, Calvin Parker. You get it through Amazon right now.
I'm sure people will be reading it. Are you going on a lecture tour? I mean, are you appearing anywhere publicly?
The only conference that I thinking of that I'm going to make would be the Ozark Mountain Conference.
Yeah.
They contacted me to go there in April, so I agreed to go to that one. And then it's just up in the air after that. Depends on what happened. Philip, I've never met Philip, and if I could get one going on in the UK, I would go to that one.
Well, there are some conferences there. Well, yeah, we've run out of time, and it's been a spectacular show. And I want to thank our co-host, of course, Tim Schwartz, and our guests tonight, and Peter Bernard, and Helen, and Carol Rodriguez, and Tina, our producer, and everybody who helps us put this together. God bless and Godspeed, and watch out for those aliens.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Schwartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Schwartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.